December the 7th, 1941 was a turning point in 20th century history. The world was changed forever by the attack on Pearl Harbor. In less than 2 hours, 2 squadrons of Japanese planes had paralyzed United States Pacific Naval Forces in one of the most daring naval and air maneuvers of all time. The shock and anger over the surprise raid united a divided America more than any other event in recent history. Tora, Tora, Tora. Richard Fisk, a bugleman on the USS West Virginia, recalls.
There was a lot of activity going on in Honolulu. We had ice cream parlors that we visited, and then there was a few bars, and we could get a cold beer for 25 cents. It was a great place. You could go down to Waikiki Beach, and we could see the bathing beauties and stuff like that, you know, and you could sleep on Waikiki Beach and nobody would even bother you.
Pearl Harbor became a port of romance. Lenore Reichert was a nurse working at the Naval Hospital. While nursing the sick, she met her future husband, Albert Reichert, a sergeant in the Marine Corps.
I met my husband at that time. He had been a patient in the wards there, and we weren't supposed to go with patients, of course. I remember he was stationed at a Marine base right next door to us, so I would go down the road and I would flash my light off and on as I came down the road, so he would step out from the bushes knowing that it was me that was coming. Nobody talked about the possibility of war. That was the farthest thing from our minds.
But in reality, the possibility of war was not that far away. By 6 a.m., the Japanese task force was in position approximately 220 miles north of Oahu. The first wave of 183 planes would take off from the decks of the 6 carriers. Hundreds of well-trained airmen gathered for last-minute instructions before boarding their aircraft. Torpedo aviator Haru Yoshino remembers the excitement aboard his carrier.
Our morale was very high among the pilots and sailors. There was a shrine on board the carrier Kaga called the Kaga Shrine. The air crew went to pray at this Kaga Shrine with some holy sake liquor, which was then placed on board each airplane.
At approximately 6:20 a.m., the first airwave took off. The crews left aboard the carriers waved and cheered Banzai, Banzai, a ceremonial chant meaning hooray, hooray. The first wave flew across the dark morning sky with anxious anticipation. The task force had successfully traveled undetected for over 10 days. The sky was thick with enemy planes, but below at Pearl Harbor, it was a typical Sunday morning.
The fleet was in great numbers here that morning. Battleship Row was majestic. 7 great battleships moored right behind me. These were small cities, these ships, crew of over 1,500. Weekend liberty was given. The fleet was at rest. There was not an air of tension here, but a typical Hawaii weekend.
At around 7:49 a.m., the moment had arrived. Commander Mitsu Fushida, a passionate pilot and warrior, was given the privilege of signaling the start of the attack. Fushida signaled with flares and then radioed to his fleet. Tora, Tora, Tora. Tiger, Tiger, Tiger. This code meant the surprise attack was successful. The air fleet had not been detected. At Pearl Harbor, Marine detachments assembled for morning colors. Bands stood on the decks of the ships lining Battleship Row. The musicians were ready to play the Star-Spangled Banner when they noticed a large grouping of planes approaching. Robert West, musician first class aboard the USS Oklahoma, remembers the moment.
I was up on the deck waiting to go raise the flags. I can remember saying to the kid next to me, a friend of mine, that I never knew we had so many planes in here. And he said, neither did I. And they just flew right over the battleships. I remember saying that kid, well, that looks like the real McCoy.
Sunday morning, I was on duty, and a plane came down between our two wards, but I could tell by him that he was Oriental too, had a mustache, and I could see him, his eyes and everything. He waved, I waved back to him, and it was right as he was going through those two wards. I knew that something was wrong because they never came over to the hospital. Then I heard the bombing.
When they dropped their torpedoes, then they would climb like this to clear the superstructure of the battleship. They had no idea that they were Japanese, none whatsoever. Then when the torpedoes hit, it blew Stanley and I across the ship. They were 118 feet wide. We picked ourselves up and looked and we said, what in the heck is going on?
Max Bauer was a first-class metalsmith aboard the repair ship USS Vestal.
They kept on coming, and the machine guns were hitting everything on the decks that they could see. And then they come right over the top of us, less than 150 feet, I would say. I went down below, and I was down there when this bomb came down back after I was. It tore down the ladder that was beside us, and my helper, by name of Reed, was in the way of the ladder, so the ladder cut him in two, and it splattered several of us with his blood.
At approximately 8 a.m., the battleships were sounding fire and rescue. Burning fuel oil now filled the harbor.
How different it was after that morning. We grew up from a 19-year-old kid to a 19-year-old man, an old man.
December 7th for me is personal because my grandfather was here, my grandmother was here, my mom was 10 years old. Grandfather was just getting off shift and he was in the shipyard when the torpedo planes roared over his head at about 100 feet. He remembers the bullets, bouncing off sheet metal next to him like hard rain. The Pacific Fleet had been here intact for the most part since that Friday on the 5th. The USS Arizona pulls in at around 10 o'clock that morning and ties up for the last time. It'll be her last mooring. At the same time, the Japanese Navy have departed from northern Japan and are racing across the northern Pacific and will arrive in Hawaiian waters on the morning of December 7th. And at 6 a.m. that morning, they begin to launch the first wave of aircraft, which was about 183 planes. And then an hour later, the second wave of aircraft, which will be 167 planes. Over this island was 350 aircraft, fighters, torpedo planes, horizontal bombers, and dive bombers, each assigned a task. They struck our airfields with such ferocity that we could not respond. We got about 14 aircraft up that morning. The fires from Pearl Harbor could be seen all over the island. My mother and my grandmother and my grandfather felt the Japanese would be in their backyards the next day. Marine guards were placed on some of the ships and along the shoreline, and it was hard to take because they could hear the tapping. All of the ships that were sunk had men trapped below because they had gone to watertight integrity. There was no way to get out. So they took cotton, put it in their ears so they couldn't hear the tapping, and then after a few days, that stopped.
My name is Tom Mahoney. I'm 89 years old. I'm from Union, New Jersey, and I'm one of the few Pearl Harbor survivors left in New Jersey. My most vivid memory of December 7th, 1941 was I had breakfast with 5 of my best friends that we went through boot camp together less than a year ago, and we had breakfast. We planned to go to Mass on one of the battleships at 8 o'clock. We were waiting for the launch. I went down to the electric shop where I was a striker, and while waiting, we heard boom, boom, and the ship began to roll. I looked out the porthole on the next deck up to see a plane dropping its torpedoes into the old Utah. These 5 boys went to their general quarter stations. We were all dressed in dress whites, ready to go to shore, church. And the next time I saw my friends was around 3 o'clock when the handling room of Gun Mount 3 cooled down, and we opened the door, and they were nothing but charcoal. They had taken the full blast of the bomb. This is etched in my brain and never will be forgotten. Later in the evening, when everything cooled down, all the metal, I went through the wreckage down to the main deck where there was 4 or 5 fellows looking at a huge sunset. It's the biggest one I ever seen in my life. I says, you will pay for this over and over again. I turned to the fellow next to me, which all of us were covered with oil, blood, soot from the fires, and we couldn't tell each other apart. Our new dress whites that we're going to go ashore in were torn and black. I turned to the fellow next to me on the rail. I said, did you hear anything about the Mahoney boys? He says, who the hell are you? I says, I'm Tom Mahoney. He says, I'm your brother Harold. We hugged and cried like the kids we really were. We've been a close-knit association for many, many years. And each one of us considered the other person a brother. We got to know their families, and we'll never forget. And I will continue to carry on what I've been doing for years, and that's talking to children in high schools and presenting certain associations with a piece, a relic of the Arizona. And I will always remember all the people that I associated with for many, many years. God bless them all, and we love you. Thank you.
Night of December 6th was just like any other night. We had no inkling. Nobody I know ever thought there'd be an air attack on Hawaii. We thought that was a haven.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
We looked up and we saw this flight of aircraft coming in from the north.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
I was just a young kid, you know.
Planes were diving from every angle.
That sound grew louder and louder.
I knew we were at war.
They were trying to bomb us and machine gun us.
We had 9 torpedoes into us and 2 bombs, and there was oil and the fire was burning all around me.
Get to your battle station on the double. This is the real thing. This is no drill. That's quite a shocker for a 20-year-old brat.
Anybody said they weren't scared, they're a liar. We were all scared, but you didn't have time to think about it.
They were concentrating on the big ships.
Bam! There went the Arizona.
All of a sudden, you had a job to do, so everybody grew up.
I was a 17-year-old naive sailor boy, but I was trying to be the very best military man that I could be. And I'm from a proud family, and I damn well know that if I'm going to lose my life, I would want my family and my country to know that I died fighting.
Freedom is not free. There's a price to be paid. Many of my shipmates paid that price.
Let's remember Pearl Harbor.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Never forget Pearl Harbor.
People think that freedom is free and that you don't have to worry about it because we've got it. But it could be lost in a hurry.
It's free because of the conflicts we've been through in previous years, and people fighting for this country has kept it free. I think we live in the greatest country in the world. I'm proud that I was part of its defense.
I'm very proud of what I did at Pearl Harbor, and I wish I could have done more. I did what I was supposed to do, and the best I could.
We had a job to do, and we did it. And my job was to get into the fight.
Our whole goal was to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
I'm not a hero. I consider that what I did was part of my job, part of my life, part of the country's survival.
I know a lot of servicemen do this when I go to things like they have where they play the Star Spangled Banner or taps. I just break down. I just can't handle it. That's the supreme sacrifice for those who gave their life.
I personally have them in my mind every day, above and beyond Memorial Day, Veterans Day, the way to memorialize our brothers and sisters that gave their life for this country is to keep ourselves informed of what they did and why.
War is hell, and it has to happen because things have to be rectified.
The liberties that we enjoy today are not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination, and we'll keep fighting for our country.
We honor and respect all of our comrades in arms that have defended and protected our American ideals since the American Revolution, right up to the present time.
The greatest performers of all time are people in the military. So in my mind, every veteran is a hero.
At 7:45, I went to have breakfast, and I had just laid my tray down on a table when the general alarm sounded. We all ran out to the armory, and they gave us 30 caliber rifles to shoot at the planes with. The rifles of that age, you know, you shot one time and you cocked the barrel. You could only shoot one bullet at a time. The planes were flying low enough, however, where you could see the pilots' faces. I'm sure we hit the planes, but a 30 caliber rifle is not going to bring a plane down.
5 minutes to 8 or 7:55, there was a terrific explosion. Now, since we had 12 or 13 mess halls in our particular quadrangle and regimental area, we thought perhaps one of them, being oil-fired in the kitchen, had an explosion. So when we got out onto the lanai, there was no indication of that, but at the same instant, a plane flew by us, very close, maybe 30 feet away, and 12 feet above us. It had just cleared a 3-story building to our left. It was an Army, therefore it must be Navy or Marines. We had no aircraft identification instructions, so what we were looking at actually was a Japanese dive bomber that had just dropped a bomb on Wheeler Field, about 3/4 of a mile away.
But then we passed by Aiea, and when I looked across, I saw all the damage that was in place. The Arizona was just engulfed in flames, and the Oklahoma had been torpedoed, and she killed over on the side. And I could see the little objects scrambling on the hull of the Oklahoma. All the sky was just black with smoke. And I don't recall seeing any Japanese planes flying because of the obstruction by the smoke.
Quite a few of us were in the hangar, in fact, pretty much the whole squadron, and we'd hear this tremendous noise, which was the dive bombers, and they make a very, very loud noise. So we ran out to the front of the hangar to see what was going on, suspecting that it was the Army Air Corps playing tricks on us again. They used to come, somebody, old-timers tell us they used to do that. They'd come by and drop flour sacks on us and make a big mess and say, ha, we got you again. But we run out there and could see them, dive bombers coming down, but didn't suspect that they were Japanese because they were the same color as the Army Air Corps planes. And even when they released their bombs, they looked like flour sacks. And then when they pulled out, we could see the rising sun on the wings, and we knew we were in big trouble.
I'd been training to be a frogman, so I spent a lot of time out in the water, and the diesel leaked out of the ships that had been hit. And so we was having to swim underneath and break water, see somebody to pick up, go back down and pick them up. Well, in 4 hours, I only picked up 46 people. Some were dead already, some badly wounded, some badly burned, and some were just tired because they jumped off of the ship or been blown off and had to get ashore.
You see the Oklahoma upside down. And the first thing they did with us, they put every little boat that wasn't damaged to work trying to save these people that jumped overboard. We lowered these rope ladders. And those that were not hurt very bad, there were quite a few of them we could put to work. We had to send to the Navy Yard to get blueprints of the bottom of the Oklahoma. But see, it'd be like the floor is the ceiling, and they're walking around on the ceiling, tapping, hoping that we'll hear them.
I graduated from high school in 1937, and there was a big depression on then, bigger than what they got now.
I ran into a former teacher at a sporting event, and he advised me to go into the service. That way I could learn a trade and I would be more job marketable at the time I got out. When the attack came, it was like going 180 degrees from a serene setting in which we were functioning to being attacked by the Japanese Imperial Navy. Of course, it was a Sunday. I was preparing to go to church.
I was still in bed up in the big barracks.
I was in the washroom and somebody said the Japanese are here, and I said, no, come on.
But immediately we heard general quarters, man your battle stations.
I hightailed it down, went outside the doors, looked up, and here were these planes just barreling over the field. And immediately we knew that we were at war.
We couldn't get at the ammunition. It was down below deck. And we took 7 torpedoes and 3 bombs, and by that time it was pretty much flooded out, I'm sure, and lost most of our sailors down there. And I kind of got half thrown off and half jumped off and swam over to Fort Island.
We set up, I would say, between 6 and 10 50 caliber machine guns. A low-flying plane flew over, machine gunned us, perturbed me a little bit. I picked up a couple rocks and threw it at him. It didn't do any good, but didn't bring him down, but it sure helped my morale.
It took 2.5 hours. It took 2 different waves, and the damage was fantastic.
Maybe we were subject to our own propaganda. We were told that Pearl Harbor was impregnable.
We never talked much about Pearl Harbor. We just felt that we had to fight a war.
Here you're 19 years old and people are shooting at you. Bombs are falling. Your life has changed. You know, it's never going to be the same again.
We were, in effect, we were thrust into history. We didn't ask for it, but we suffered through it. The freedom that we enjoy is not to be taken for granted because it was paid for by the lives of many, many young men. It is our most precious asset.
It's the hand of the Lord that directed me because there's so many things happened to me during the war that I can't put an answer to. I dedicated my life to my country. It was my duty, and I'm proud of it.
I retired in 1960, got into the civilian world. It was real nice because I came to a job of the Naval Air Test Center, and I've been in Maryland ever since. When I became the president of the Association of Pearl Harbor Survivors, the first thing I said, look, there's no Navy, Army, or Marines. I said, if you're in the organization, you are a Pearl Harbor survivor.
On December 7, 1941, I had the 4-8 watch that morning. When I sat down to have breakfast, I just set my tray on the table when we could hear a big commotion from the Pearl Harbor side. And we thought nothing of it because they were dredging the harbor then until the word came, man your battle stations, this is not a drill, this is not a drill. We ran out to the armory. They gave me a .30 caliber rifle, and about that time we saw the planes up above, and we saw the red circle on the bottom. We knew it was Japanese. They were flying low enough where you could see the pilots' faces.
Being a Navy brat and being associated with other Navy dependents, everybody's dad was a World War II veteran. So you just kind of took it for granted. I remember as a young boy, my father showing me his diary logbook.
Yeah, I thought it was important to keep a diary to let my daughter and my family know what was happening. And I'm glad I did, because my grandchildren know what I did.
It's easy for us to forget the kind of sacrifice they made, and they didn't ask anything in return. They are the real heroes for us to emulate.
I volunteer a lot. I go to the Arizona as often as I can. I get very emotional. That's why I wear my dark glasses, because tears come to my eyes. I cry. I actually cry.
How wonderful it was that kind of generation, which of course is now called the greatest generation, so easily sacrificed but never bragged about it. And I'm willing to bet that if people searched around and talked to their grandparents, there's probably some little memoirs there. And gosh, don't throw them away. Pull them out, read them, and share them with others.
God, yes. I don't know which is the worst death, like those guys on the Oklahoma. Pitch black and that water coming up on the deck, on the floor at the deck. No escape or anything, just slow death. Die after 70 years. Don't leave me.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
I saw these high-level bombers coming over, and that's when we took off for the parking lot. My bunk was right about up in here on the second floor. That's the door I came out. There used to be a sidewalk right out this way.
Nearly 2 million people make the journey to Pearl Harbor each year. Only a few bring Pearl Harbor with them.
Sometimes I can't remember what you told me last week, but I can remember everything, dates and everything else, dating back to 70 years ago when I was a 17-year-old kid came here to Pearl Harbor.
Just hours after touching down in Hawaii,
Make a line here.
18 Wisconsin veterans make history.
We have never seen a group of survivors this big come back to Pearl Harbor from one state. This is a first.
The veterans gather in an area known as Contemplation Circle. In the distance, the USS Arizona Memorial, triggering vivid memories of that fiery, horrific Sunday morning more than 70 years ago.
Very end over there, there's a seaplane hangar. He dropped his bomb in that seaplane hangar, and it was a great big red ball of fire and a big black puff of smoke, and then all hell broke loose.
It was chaos is what it was. And all I could see were those rising suns flying around. Wow.
Them Japanese planes came in from here and here and here. I don't know how they didn't run into each other. There were so many.
There was one fella kneeling on the floor, and I grabbed him and I said, "It's too late to pray now. We better get the hell out of here."
We were hit by a torpedo. We took a lot of hits.
And you take to Arizona. Them guys got up there that morning and had their breakfast or whatever, and they're still right there. Of all the times I've been here to Pearl Harbor and here in Hawaii, I don't think there's been a time that I felt so complete in what happened here in the last couple of days. And I'll go to my grave, and I'm sure I'll never forget.
By land,
Looking sharp, buddy.
and by sea, the veterans went back.
Looking good.
Back to where they served, back to where they survived.
Well, at first I thought it wasn't going to affect me too much. but it has. It's tough to see all the misery that was created and changed our life so much.
More than 70 years after the Japanese attack, most of these men met for the very first time.
What ship were you on?
The connection, instant. The bond, forever lasting.
We have a special group, people that went through that terrible thing and survived it and have lived this long.
After 75 years or so, I think a lot of people have begun to forget about what happened on that date.
Kids walk up to me and I've got Pearl Harbor plates on my car. They say, "What's Pearl Harbor?" They don't know what Pearl Harbor is. They wasn't ever taught.
We'd go talk to history class. They never heard of Pearl Harbor. A lot of them. And they're graduating seniors.
Originally, there was approximately 17,500 Pearl Harbor survivors. Right now, there's less than 300 of that group that's still alive. I wanted to be remembered as a day that there was a lot of sacrifice, that we took an awful lot of casualties, we stood our ground, and we eventually overcome.
Japan hit us by surprise, and that should teach us to be on the alert at all time and not let that happen again.
Wasn't a fiction that the greatest country in the world, the greatest Navy in the world, and boom. You never know. The best is just keep alert. Don't let your guard down, because it could happen again.
My last word on Pearl Harbor is to keep America safe.
Everybody should know that they should expect the unexpected. The liberties that we enjoy today are not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination. There are going to be wars. Just be prepared.
I think about Santa's quote, "Those who do not remember history are bound to repeat it."
Don't forget Pearl Harbor. Study the history of Pearl Harbor. It'll keep you out of trouble in the future.
I was a 17-year-old naive sailor boy, but I was trying to be the very best military man that I could be. And I'm from a proud family, and I damn well know that if I'm going to lose my life, I would want my family and my country to know that I died fighting.
Freedom is not free. There's a price to be paid. Many of my shipmates paid that price.
Let's remember Pearl Harbor.